The Indiana Fever weren't supposed to win this game. Not without Caitlin Clark at full strength. Not against this version of the Las Vegas Aces. But somewhere between the tip-off and the final buzzer, the script got flipped, and the WNBA was left stunned as Sophie Cunningham delivered a performance so fiery, so unrelenting, it felt like the birth of a new era. Let's set the stage. Caitlin Clark, sidelined recently with a groin injury, had finally returned. But this wasn't the usual Clark-led domination we've come to expect. She was easing back in. If you're here for the real story and not the filtered version, subscribe. And if you're sticking around for the next meltdown, you better definitely subscribe. Still testing her limits. Still playing smart. She wasn't a flamethrower tonight. She was the spark. Her gravity, her presence alone, forced the Aces to stretch their defense. And in doing so, they made a fatal mistake. They forgot about Sophie Cunningham. And no, did she make them pay. From the moment she touched the ball, you could feel it. This wasn't going to be a normal night. Sophie didn't just knock down her shots. She destroyed them. Her form was clean, her release fast, and her confidence so loud it practically echoed. The Aces couldn't close out fast enough. They rotated late, hesitated just slightly, and she made them suffer for every single misstep. By the third quarter, it wasn't even a question of who had the hot hand. It was a question of why the Fever weren't running every single play through her. The Fever's offense, which had sometimes stalled without Clark, suddenly looked alive. The ball was zipping. Players were cutting with purpose. And every time Sophie got the rock at the arc, the crowd held its breath. Swish. Another three. Swish. Another one. Las Vegas started scrambling. And for once, it was them who looked out of rhythm. Aya Wilson, the Aces' usual anchor, couldn't hold her team back into control. Indiana had them on their heels, and they just kept pushing. Meanwhile, Clark, she played the ultimate facilitator. She didn't have to put up 30 points. She just had to be there, spreading the floor, manipulating defenders, playing chess while Sophie played target practice. And in a league where stars are often expected to dominate or disappear, Clark's willingness to step back and let her teammates shine was its own kind of statement. This was a team win. But make no mistake, Sophie Cunningham owned it. Now, here's where it gets even more wild. This one wasn't just impressive. It was disruptive. The Fever weren't supposed to dethrone the Aces, who sat comfortably at the top of the league's food chain. But they didn't just beat them. They dismantled them. The final score, 80-70, doesn't fully tell the story. It doesn't capture the way Indiana dictated the pace, or the way Las Vegas looked rattled. Unsure, like they didn't know who they were up against anymore. Because this wasn't the Indiana Fever people thought they knew. This wasn't the Caitlin Clark show. This was something more dangerous. A team that could win without her being the centerpiece. A team that had discovered its depth. Natasha Howard was a beast in the paint. Kelsey Mitchell found her rhythm in the second half, hitting big shots that stopped the Aces from making any real run. And Coach Stephanie White? She pulled off the kind of game plan that only works when you fully trust your players. She let the offense breathe, let the momentum flow through whoever was feeling it, and, most importantly, didn't get in the way. That's a coaching win as much as it is a player win. You could feel the shift in energy by the fourth quarter. Las Vegas, who usually closes out games with an iron grip, looked like they were stuck in mud. They tried to adjust, but it was too late. Cunningham had already burned through every defensive strategy they threw at her. And with Clark back as a decoy, quietly orchestrating from the outside, the Aces couldn't lock down on anyone. The Fever weren't just better tonight. They were smarter, more focused, more connected. And it sent a message to the entire league. If you thought this team lived and died by Caitlin Clark, you weren't paying attention. Sophie Cunningham has officially arrived. Not as a bench spark or a role player, but as a problem for opposing teams. A sharpshooting, floor spacing, heat-check nightmare who doesn't need a green light. Because she is a light, and this matters. Because when you look at how championship teams are built, it's never just one superstar dragging everyone across the finish line. It's layers. It's chemistry. It's unexpected heroes. It's nights like this. Indiana now knows they can win tough games with more than just Clark leading the charge. And that's terrifying for everyone else. Because what happens when Clark's back at 100%? What happens when teams try to trap her at the top of the key, only to leave Sophie open in the corner? What happens when defenses have to pick their poison between Mitchell's mid-range, Howard's post-work, and Cunningham's long-range bombs? It becomes a nightmare. And just as the Fever are rising, the aces are starting to slip. This wasn't the invincible Las Vegas we're used to seeing. This was a team getting outplayed, outshot, and out-hustled. Aya Wilson still had her moments, but even she couldn't stop the bleeding. Every time they tried to claw back, someone in a Fever jersey shut the door. Sophie's performance was more than stats. It was symbolic. It was a reminder that greatness isn't reserved for the top pick or the biggest name on the jersey. Sometimes it's a player who grinds in silence, waits for a moment, and then drops an explosion on national television. And for Caitlin Clark, watching from the sidelines, supporting every bucket, clapping for every dagger three, it was a shift in identity. She didn't have to be the hero tonight. She got to be the teammate, the one who makes space for others to shine. And you better believe she'll remember this game when she is back to taking over. Because now she knows she doesn't have to do it alone. Indiana Fever just became the most unpredictable team in the league. And that unpredictability, that's their power. One night, it's Clark pulling up from the logo. The next, it's Sophie going nuclear from deep. Or Kelsey Mitchell turning into a closer. Or Natasha Howard bullying the paint. This team is no longer a one-note story. They're the main plot. And tonight, the WNBA just got flipped on its head. The so-called underdogs humiliated the defending Titans, and they did it with a smile, a fire, and a flurry of threes. Sophie Cunningham didn't just shock the league, she changed it. And somewhere on that sideline, Caitlin Clark wasn't just smiling, she was plotting. The shockwaves from that Fever versus Aces game didn't end when the buzzer sounded. In fact, that buzzer may have been the starter pistol for something far more dangerous. The Indiana Fever becoming a team no one saw coming, and Sophie Cunningham evolving into the WNBA's most unexpected disruptor. Because make no mistake, this wasn't just a great night. This was a pivot point, a definitive, league-wide wake-up call that the pecking order isn't as solid as people thought. The Fever didn't just pull off an upset. They rewrote what's possible when a team stops waiting for someone else to carry them and starts trusting their own firepower. And Sophie, she lit the match. Her rise couldn't come at a better or more symbolic moment. Caitlin Clark, the rookie phenom who's carried more media weight than entire franchises, wasn't a headliner. She was a side character, the support beam, the decoy. And Sophie, she became the storm. The WNBA's biggest win of the week didn't belong to a former MVP, a buzzy rookie, or a market-favorite team. It belonged to a player who, not long ago, was seen as a glue piece at best. That's what makes this so powerful. Cunningham's performance wasn't manufactured hype. It was raw, it was earned, and it was undeniable. She took a national audience and forced them to learn her name loudly. And now, the conversation around the Fever has shifted entirely. For the first time all season, this team doesn't just have depth, it's leaning into it. And that's a massive shift in identity. Earlier in the season, everything flowed through Clark. If she was having an off night, so was the team. But now, with Sophie bombing from deep, Kelsey Mitchell finding her clutch rhythm, and Natasha Howard anchoring the post, Indiana looks less like a single-star act and more like an ensemble cast with range. This is exactly the kind of development that separates playoff teams from media darlings. Media attention is fleeting. Depth wins games in August. And the Fever? They finally look like they figured out how to weaponize their full arsenal. What's even more impressive is the mental shift. You could feel it in the way the Fever carried themselves. They weren't playing up to the Aces. They were playing through them. There was no deference, no intimidation, just attack after attack, with Cunningham setting the tone. That's not just physical execution. That's psychological dominance. You don't go toe-to-toe with Aya Wilson and walk away looking cooler. But Indiana did. And it's not because they're suddenly more talented on paper. It's because they believed in what they were doing. This team no longer flinches when things get tight. They're starting to trust each other, not just their star. That kind of internal belief is deadly, because once it sets in, it spreads. Shooters shoot freer. Defenders rotate faster. Coaches call bolder plays. You stop hoping to win and start expecting to win. That's the culture Caitlin Clark was supposed to build. But in this moment, it's Sophie Cunningham who's carried the torch. Let's talk about the ripple effects of that. Because now, opposing teams can't just key in on Clark. You lock her down? Great. Sophie might drop 24 on you from behind the arc. You try to double the post? Mitchell is now cutting and pulling up like it's 2019 again. There's no longer a clear blueprint to beat Indiana. You can't just bully Clark off the ball or send double teams every time she crosses half court. The Fever have become complicated. That's exactly what you want heading into the back half of the season. Complexity, variability, firepower. And it's not just Cunningham who's benefiting. This shift has elevated everyone. Kelsey Mitchell, for instance, has been a lightning rod for criticism this season. Fair or not. But in this game, she was composed, decisive, and clutch. Not the focal point, but the dagger when it mattered. That's the version of Mitchell Indiana has always needed. A complimentary assassin. Someone who doesn't need 25 shots to kill a defense. Just 2 or 3 at the perfect moment. Even the bench looked different. More engaged. More vocal. There's a vibe now that wasn't there earlier in the season. Players celebrating each other's buckets. Not just their own. Everyone rooting for whoever's hot. Not auditioning for touches. That doesn't happen unless the team starts a buy-in. And they're buying hard. But here's what really matters. This one didn't rely on perfection. It didn't require a 40-point triple-double from Clark or some miracle finish. It was gritty, messy at times, but it was built on balance. They didn't just shoot well, they defended well. They rebounded. They communicated. They executed. That's a real basketball win. Not an ESPN highlight reel, but a playoff-style punch to the gut. And that's why it's sustainable. This wasn't lightning in a bottle. It was a culmination of lessons learned over months of struggle. Caitlin Clark's early season frustrations, the physical play, the hard fouls, the spotlight. Sophie's stretches of being underused. Kelsey's inconsistency. The team's lack of chemistry. All of it has slowly pushed them toward this moment. And now, they've broken through. They're not just surviving anymore. They're building. And the rest of the league is watching. Because if Indiana keeps this up, suddenly every matchup becomes a nightmare. Coaches will have to game plan for multiple threats, not just contain Clark. Defenders will have to chase shooters around the arc and protect the paint. You want to switch? Okay, now you got a size mismatch on Howard. You want to trap? Good luck recovering to Sophie. You want to run zone? Clark's passing will slice that up in seconds. This team went from fun story to legit problem overnight. And maybe the scariest part? They haven't even hit their ceiling yet. Clark's not even fully back. The rotations are still evolving. The chemistry is still settling. And yet, they just handed the Las Vegas Aces, one of the most dominant franchises in recent memory, a 10-point L and didn't even break a sweat doing it. So now what? Now the expectations change. For Sophie, for Clark, for everyone. Cunningham can't go back to being a second-option spacer. She's proven she can carry a game. The team has to keep feeding her when she's on. This can't be a one-night thing. It has to become part of the identity. Clark, on the other hand, has to navigate this with grace. Because being the star and still deferring when it makes sense, that's hard. But it's what championship leaders do. She has the IQ, the vision, the unselfishness. Now, she needs to let it evolve into something more than just production. She needs to let it become empowerment. And for Coach White, the path forward is delicate but exciting. She's got tools now. Not just Clark-centric offense. Not just Sophie running off screens. She's got options. The question is, can she keep everyone happy while maximizing what works? It's a challenge, but a good one, because Indiana is no longer just in the conversation. They are the conversation. And that's what happens when your team stops waiting for one person to carry the load and starts realizing that the firepower was there all along. It just needed a moment and a flamethrower like Sophie Cunningham to bring it to life. There's something almost poetic about the way the Indiana Fever have reintroduced themselves to the league. Less like a team desperate for validation, and more like a sleeping giant finally stirring. And while Sophie Cunningham and Caitlin Clark are dominating headlines, the bigger story brewing beneath the surface is this. The culture in Indiana is shifting, and that shift is starting to scare people. Let's talk about why this transformation feels so different. For the better part of the season, the Fever were stuck in a loop, relying on Clark's shooting, hoping Mitchell found rhythm, praying the defense will hold just long enough. It was a kind of game plan that works until it doesn't. But now, they're not just reacting to the game. They're dictating it. That's a massive change in posture. They're aggressive from the jump, intentional with rotations, and finally playing with rhythm on both ends of the floor. This newfound cohesion is visible in the small things, how the players communicate during defensive switches, how quickly the ball moves around perimeter, and even how the bench celebrates each other instead of just waiting for Clark to make something magical happen. For months, they played like a group of individuals trying to adjust to a once-in-a-generation rookie. Now, they look like a team with a system, not just a system built around one player. And speaking of systems, Stephanie White deserves credit that she may not be getting publicly, but her players feel it. Her rotations, once clunky and confusing, now feel purposeful. She's experimenting less and trusting more. There's clarity in the way the offense is being run. Plays aren't just called, they're executed. You can see the trust building, especially when the game slows down. Instead of reverting to ISO ball or watching Clark run in circles while the defense suffocates her, there's structure now, movement, options. That coaching shift has opened the door for players like Nalissa Smith, who's quietly had one of the most impressive stretch of games this season, grabbing rebounds, contesting shots, and setting hard screens that free up shooters. She doesn't get the fanfare of a Clark or Cunningham, but her role is pivotal. She's a glue in the front court. And when she's locked in, Indiana plays with a level of interior toughness that makes them a threat to any team in the league. It's also worth noting how the Fever's defensive mentality has evolved. Earlier in the season, they were constantly caught flat-footed on rotations and slow to recover on fast breaks. But now, the energy on defense is palpable. They're fighting over screens, talking through matchups, and doubling at the right times instead of the desperate, reactive switches we saw in June. And when the defense tightens, the offense becomes more relaxed. That's not just good basketball. It's a sign of confidence. You can see it in how they respond to adversity now. Take the second quarter against the Aces, when Las Vegas briefly took a lead and started to build momentum. That's the kind of moment that would have unraveled the Fever earlier this season. The panic would have set in. The threes would have started flying. The body language would have crumbled. But this time, Indiana just tightened up. They didn't force shots. They moved the ball, trusted the process, and let their defense buy them time to settle. It worked. That's maturity. That's chemistry. That's belief in the system. And let's not overlook how this evolution impacts Clark herself. She's been the focal point of attention since the moment she was drafted. Some of it deserved, much of it exhausting. But now, for the first time, the weight isn't all on her shoulders. The pressure be everything. The scorer, the leader, the franchise savior, has softened. What this game showed us is that Clark can now be what she's best at. A high IQ playmaker who bends defenses, creates chaos with her vision, and punishes teams who give her just a sliver of daylight. Without needing to go full hero mode every night, she becomes even more dangerous. With players like Sophie Cunningham proving they can carry scoring loads, Clark can pick her spots, stay healthy, and become even more efficient. That's a nightmare scenario for opposing teams. You can't trap her. She'll dish it to a shooter who's shooting 60% from deep. You can't sag off. She'll bury a three. You can't overcommit to the pick and roll. Howard or Smith will roll to the basket for a high percentage look. It's pick your poison, and the menu keeps growing. What's happening in Indiana right now is more than a streak or a feel-good story. It's a blueprint, a roadmap for how a team takes the media frenzy surrounding a rookie and turns it into a foundation for sustainable success. It's easy to say you're building for the future. It's much harder to prove it in real time, with statement wins against title contenders. The Fever have done that. They've taken a team that was dismissed as rebuilding and turned it into a team that's recalibrating the entire balance of power in the league. That's not just about winning games. It's about changing reputations. Teams are starting to circle Indiana on their calendar, not as an easy win, but as a test. And honestly, it's about time. This team has been doubted all season. Every win came with an asterisk. Every Clark performance was picked apart. Every player not named Caitlin was labeled expendable. But after dismantling one of the WNBA's most dominant teams, and doing it with teamwork, poise, and unapologetic confidence, the Fever aren't asking for respect anymore. They're taking it.